Hi, it's Katrina. The creatures you're about to see in today's video are some of the biggest and most frightening that have ever lived. From a carnivorous dinosaur bigger than the T-Rex to a creepy crawly so big it will give you nightmares. If that sounds good, be sure to subscribe and prepare for a savage pack hunter. The savage Mapusaurus. Pack hunter? In 2006, fossil hunters in Patagonia discovered the remains of more than half a dozen carnivorous monsters. These beasts of the prehistoric era were even bigger and badder than everyone's favorite carnivore, the T-Rex. Its giant lizard feet could have easily squashed a person. The dinosaur I'm talking about is the Mapusaurus rosei. It's a creature very few people have ever heard of before, so be sure to tell your friends. According to paleontologist Philip Curry, the dinosaur was roughly 40 feet long, its head the size of a bathtub, its teeth like deadly daggers. Despite its size, scientists don't think it could have been successful hunting and killing some of the monstrous plant eaters that lived alongside it 100 million years ago in South America. Plant eaters like Argentinosaurus, considered one of the biggest dinosaurs in history. Argentinosaurus stood as tall as a 6-story building. I know, seeing an elephant in real life is amazing. You look up into the eyes of an enormous pachyderm with a sense of wonder. But picture yourself looking up a 6-story building into the eyes of a dinosaur whose head is practically in the clouds. Argentinosaurus was too big for Mapusaurus to attack and kill on its own, and Mapusaurus had a skull more than 6 feet long. That's why Dr. Curry and his team believe the meat-eating dinosaur hunted in packs. As if one of the biggest carnivores ever wasn't scary enough, they hunted in groups. Dr. Curry said the younger ones were extremely agile because they had long legs. There could have been a dozen of these beasts charging through the primeval jungles of Argentina like a gang of savages. They were attacking and devouring things much larger than themselves. The Argentinosaurus weighed about 100 tons, while Mapusaurus weighed around 8 tons. One-on-one, it was no contest. It was like a dog trying to attack, a lion. But in a group, it was possible. By the way, did you know that the T-Rex hasn't been the king of the dinosaurs for nearly 30 years? In the 1990s, paleontologists found the bones of the Giganotosaurus in South America. It was bigger than the T-Rex, and the Mapusaurus was bigger than the Giganotosaurus, the biggest cats ever. Scientists think they have discovered one of the biggest cats in the history of Earth. This predatory feline was so humongous that it hunted rhinos. It made the African lion look like a tabby cat. The cat came into existence about 9 million years ago, making it an early relative of everybody's favorite Ice Age feline, the saber-toothed tiger. Normally, when people talk about saber-toothed tigers, they are talking about Smilodon. Smilodon populator was not an actual tiger. It was the last known saber-toothed cat living in the Americas during the Pleistocene era, going extinct about 12,000 years ago at the end of the Ice Age. It lived alongside other famous Ice Age beasts like direwolves, American lions, and short-faced bears. It likely hunted mastodons, mammoths, and giant ground sloths. But how big was Smilodon? Scientists think it was the biggest cat of its kind, with the heaviest weighing up to 800 pounds. In comparison, the newly found Machairodus lahayishapup weighed 600 pounds. Great name, huh? I don't know if I said that correctly. But anyway, although it was a little smaller, it also went extinct 5 million years earlier. It was the original saber-toothed tiger, like Smilodon's great times 100 grandfather. The big cat lived in North America. 7 fossil specimens were examined from museum collections in Texas, Oregon, Idaho, and California. Ohio State University paleontologist Jonathan Khalid said it was the biggest cat alive at the time. One of its leg bones was found to be 1.4 times bigger than the same bone in the average modern lion. Forget bringing back the mammoth. I think scientists should resurrect the prehistoric saber-toothed cat. Well, maybe if someone can figure out how to make them house-sized. The giant koala of Australia. In prehistoric Australia, koala bears were a little different than they are today. They were giants of the woods. These weren't cuddly koala bears living in the trees. The ancient ones were 5 times bigger, so much harder to cuddle. The prehistoric koala is scientifically called Nimbodon lavarocorum. It was a heavyweight herbivore that lived in the forests of Australia during the Miocene era. It also lived high in the treetops, and its lifestyle was really similar to modern koala bears. Their massive claws let them hold onto trees. Their short hind limbs made it so that they could hang effortlessly from the branches. If the giant koala was so similar to the modern koala, then why did it go extinct? Scientists think it was too big. It weighed 150 pounds. Quite a lot for a creature that lived in the canopy. This was 15 million years ago. The dinosaurs were gone, and Australia was overrun by creatures so scary that they make the modern outback look like a child's petting zoo. Australia was home to kangaroos that ate flesh. There were crocodiles with heads shaped like meat cleavers, and there was even a marsupial lion running around, disemboweling and causing havoc. You wouldn't have lasted 20 minutes in prehistoric Australia. Then again, maybe you're secretly Tarzan. Who am I to say? In any case, Nimbodon had been a very successful giant koala. It lived across Australia and New Guinea. Its downfall was likely its dependence on the forests. As Australia changed and its forests became sparser, the giant koala was running out of room to live. It went extinct about 11,000 years ago, at the same time as other giant Australian animals like the giant wombat, Diprotodon, and Megalania, which was the biggest terrestrial lizard in the history of the universe. How would you like to hear about Megalania while I'm on the subject? I wasn't planning to, but why not? 2 million years ago, a giant lizard evolved in Australia. It was 25 feet long and weighed an astounding 2 tons. This thing was bigger than most crocodiles. Don't mistake it for a croc or an alligator. It was a lizard. More specifically, it was a giant monitor lizard. Do you know what the largest lizard alive right now is? I'll give you a hint. It lives on the island of Komodo. The Komodo dragon of Indonesia only weighs 150 pounds. But I wouldn't get near one with a 30-foot pole. They're vicious, and I'm pretty certain they have toxin in their saliva that can cause fatal infections. The Komodo dragon is scary, but Megalania was scarier. It was most definitely the apex predator, feasting on kangaroos and giant wombats, and maybe koalas. There were only 2 other giants in Australia that could compete with the humongous lizard. There was Thylacoleo, the giant marsupial. Then there was the Kinkana, a crocodile that weighed about 500 pounds. Megalania wasn't messing with either of them. One of the coolest features of the giant monitor lizard was that it ran very quickly. I'm sure you've seen a lizard running before, like an iguana or a gecko on the wall. They skitter crazy fast across the ground. Megalania could likely do the same thing, only it was 24 feet long and could chomp a human being in half. Scientists think Megalania went extinct 40,000 years ago when prehistoric humans hunted its favorite prey to extinction. Maximo the titanosaur. Nobody was bigger than Maximo. Maximo is the name of the titanosaur on display at the Field Museum in Chicago. The dinosaur lived 100 million years ago in Patagonia, alongside the beasts I told you about earlier in the video, Argentinosaurus and Mapusaurus. But Maximo was the biggest of them all. Scientifically, Maximo was a Patagotitan majorum. It grew 122 feet long, its head 28 feet above the ground. The cast of its skeleton stretches across Stanley Field Hall. It was the biggest known animal to ever take a breath. The title no longer applies to the blue whale. Maximo was bigger. Maximo weighed as much as 10 African elephants. Its fossils were uncovered on a family farm near La Flecha in Argentina. A rancher stumbled upon a bone sticking out of the floor of the desert. It wasn't even buried. It was like a cartoon dog bone sticking obviously out of the dirt. The more the rancher surveyed the area, the more he realized he had stumbled upon something amazing. There wasn't just one bone, there were over 100 of them. Scientists from a local museum were called to investigate. Over the next few years, scientists identified 6 individual dinosaurs. It was a titan graveyard. This amazing discovery led to the titanosaur being recognized as an official new species in 2017. And now for a quick break because it's shoutout time! I want to give a huge thank you to Jeff Evelyn for the generous super thanks. It really means a lot. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe to join the Origins Explained family because why not? The Shantungosaurus. Comes to humongous dinosaurs that can give you nightmares, Shantungosaurus is at the top of that list. This monster of an animal lived between 83 and 74 million years ago. But it wasn't a carnivore. It was the biggest duck-billed dino that ever lived. In scientific terms, it was a hadrosaurid. That's the technical term for duck-billed dinosaur. Shantungosaurus looked a little bit like a mix between a tyrannosaur and a duck, with a splash of Komodo dragon thrown in for good measure. It was a truly massive behemoth that dominated the pine forests of China. Its name means Shandong lizard because its fossil was first discovered in Shandong province. The herbivorous lizard's skull measured an astonishing 5.3 feet in length. This thing's head was bigger than most velociraptors. If that was its head, what was its body like? Scientists have done 2 reconstructions based on what few fossils have been found of this giant dinosaur. They believe that Shantungosaurus grew 54 feet long. That's from the tip of its nose to the tip of its tail. As for height, it was likely about 23 feet tall at the shoulder, and talking weight could have been up to 20 tons. You might be wondering how a muscular creature with feet like a bird, a mouth like a duck, and a body like a dragon could maintain such huge body weight. It had to eat a lot of plants. Mostly it ate pine branches, woody plants, and thorny flora. Although the duck-billed giant didn't have particularly strong jaws, it had a ton of teeth. Scientists think it had about 1,500 teeth in its mouth for ripping apart plants. Even a shark would consider that a lot of teeth. The world of the worms. Long before our planet was a diverse place with thousands of plants, sea creatures, insects, birds, it was a worm world. The entire globe was dominated by gross, wriggling worms in the oceans. Now scientists think they may have found the biggest one. 518 million years ago, this critter was considered a giant. It was one of the earliest rulers of the animal kingdom. It would have been one of the biggest living things on Earth. Yet to us, it's a pipsqueak. The giant carnivorous worm was only a foot long. Still, it was frightening. The worm had giant jaws, long antennae, and weird fins on its body that sort of made it look like it was wearing a cape. It glided through the seas and oceans at the top of the prehistoric food chain. The worm's fossil was discovered by scientists with the Korea Polar Research Institute in Greenland. They named the creature Timoribestia coprae, which translates roughly to terror beasts. Jacob Vinther, an Earth scientist, said the worm was the ancient equivalent of a modern shark. But the craziest part is that the worms are still alive. They live on through their ancient relatives, known today as arrowworms. They've been in the oceans for 538 million years. It means that these worms have been around since before the earliest arthropods, creatures like spiders and crustaceans. Are you impressed? Florida's giant ground sloth. Sloths used to be a lot bigger. The biggest of them all may have been Eremotherium eomigrans, known commonly as the wandering giant ground sloth. It was about the size of an elephant, 20 feet long and utterly unstoppable. About 24 skeletons were excavated from ancient lake sediment in Florida, along with a handful of specimens from South Carolina. The giant ground sloths may have migrated even further north before succumbing to extinction. Scientists think the sloths originated in South America and made their way north before dying out. It's crazy to think the adorable tree sloths of today used to be terrifying monsters with 3 long fingers that had claws on the ends and could disembowel. But that's the way it was from 5.3 million years ago until 10,000 years ago. Giant ground sloths were still roaming Florida when the woolly mammoth was already extinct. You can see a reconstruction of the giant ground sloth at the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History. While standing on its hind legs, it was like a bear on steroids ready to attack. It's believed it weighed around 15,000 pounds, making it one of the biggest terrestrial mammals in the Americas. The giant beaver. When you think about animals indigenous to Canada, what's the first thing that comes to mind? If it isn't a beaver, you're doing something wrong. Just kidding, it was probably a bear, right? Beavers aren't just Canada's favorite mammal today. Tens of thousands of years ago, there was a giant beaver that roamed the Canadian wilderness, and it was the size of a bear. What an incredible animal! The giant beaver, scientific name Castor canadensis, was a giant of the Ice Age. It was more than 6 feet long and believed to be the largest rodent that ever lived. Most of its fossils have been found along the Atlantic coast, though it was hardly restricted to one area. It also lived in the Yukon and the Great Lakes. Its front incisors were the size of bananas. Not mini bananas either. Those whopping bananas you only get from tropic zones. But one of the coolest things about the giant beaver is that it lived alongside humans. Just like how Ice Age North Americans lived alongside woolly mammoths, they lived alongside giant beavers too. Traditional stories from Aboriginal groups like Old Crow prominently feature huge beavers. And not just because they found beaver fossils. The plus-sized beaver was alive 12,000 years ago, as humans were migrating to North America from Siberia and Asia. To give you an idea of just how big these beavers were, check out this comparison. The skull on top is from Castor canadensis. The skull on the bottom is from a modern beaver. The picture is thanks to Greg McDonald of the U.S. National Park Service. So here you can see just the size I'm talking about. The world's biggest earwig. Now for something absolutely creepy. There is nothing that sends chills up a person's spine quite like an earwig wriggling around in front of them. But did you know there used to be a giant earwig so massive it was almost 4 inches long? That doesn't sound very big, but it is when you consider a common earwig is only 0.5 inches long. And while I'm on the subject of common earwigs, I'd like to dispel one of the most terrifying insect myths ever created. The earwig does not crawl into people's ears while they're asleep. I'm not sure who started saying it first, but don't worry, it's not true. The name earwig comes from the Old English ear beetle. The truth is that earwigs prefer to live in piles of logs or stones. They eat organic matter, things like dead plants and dead animals. They also prefer to be active at night, hiding under rotten logs during the day. Earwigs want nothing to do with your earwax, and they definitely don't want to crawl into your brain and lay eggs. You might be interested in knowing that earwigs are excellent mothers. After they lay their eggs, they guard the nest and keep the eggs clean until their babies hatch. Then they guard all of their youngsters until the baby insects grow big enough to find their own food. That's the common earwig. I'm here to tell you about the St. Helena giant earwig, scientific name Labidura herculana, like Hercules. It was the biggest earwig known to have existed. But get ready to be shocked, because it only went extinct in 2014. The history of this massive bug is fascinating. It was discovered by a Danish entomologist named Johann Fabricius in 1798. Then people forgot about it, until ornithologist Douglas Dorward found the remnants of one in 1962 while looking for bird bones. Live specimens weren't uncovered until 1965. Nobody has seen it alive since. In 2005, scientists from the Natural History Museum in London conducted a long and grueling hunt for the bugs, but they didn't find any. By 2014, it was agreed they had gone extinct. The giant earwig likely went extinct due to habitat loss. Scientists think the removal of surface stones for human construction took away places for the earwigs to live. But please let the world know if you do find one of these creepy crawlies. After all, that's what social media is for. The biggest creature that ever lived. From bug to behemoth, scientists have just discovered a new species of whale that could be the largest animal in history. I mean large and in charge. A whale even bigger than the modern blue whale. The discovery began a decade and a half ago with paleontologists from the University of Pisa. They uncovered some whale bones in the remote Ica Desert of Peru. The fossils were clearly from a cetacean, the animal family that whales belong to. They were also about 40 million years old. At first, scientists figured they had just found another whale. So what? Big deal. There were lots of fairly ordinary ancient whales around, but as they continued studying the fossils, they started making some shocking realizations. The whale was unbelievably stout. When I say stout, I mean portly to the max. The whale was roughly 15 feet shorter than the modern blue whale. But oh boy, was it heavier. Lead researcher Giovanni Bianucci said the whale was 3 times heavier than the blue whale. Its skeleton alone weighed an astonishing 8 tons. And get this, it had legs. As you can most likely guess, the whale wasn't going jogging. Instead, it would have used its legs to gently push itself along the seabed. It's like when you're swimming in a shallow pool, propelling yourself forward with your toes. There was no way its legs could have supported its 340 tons of bulk. A single vertebrae, just one vertebrae, weighed over 200 pounds. Scientists have named the leviathan Periucetus colossus. There is only one specimen that scientists know about. This creature was the heaviest thing that ever evolved on the planet, but scientists only have fossils from one. It makes you wonder, was P. colossus really the heaviest animal? What other monsters of the deep used to prowl the seas but have never been found? The warthog frog. Researchers have discovered a previously unknown species of giant amphibian. Part lizard, part frog, part warthog. This creepy amalgamation lived 240 million years ago in Australia. Even in prehistoric times, Australia was home to the most bizarre animals on Earth. The monster could help scientists better understand the evolution of amphibians. That's how weird it is. The fossil was excavated from a quarry in New South Wales 3 decades ago in the 1990s, but nobody knew what it was, so it was put into a drawer. It was only now that scientists at the Australian Museum opened the drawer and took a look at the fossil. They couldn't believe their eyes. The fossil includes almost the full skeleton of the ancient amphibian, even bits of its skin. Lachlan Hart with the museum said the animal is a Temnospondylus, an ancient family that lived before the dinosaurs and with the dinosaurs, but then followed them into extinction. But just what is it? Scientists have named the creature Arena Erpeton supinatus. It lived in freshwater river environments and most likely hunted fish. When it was still alive, Australia was a lot closer to the South Pole. It was considerably colder on the continent than it is today. A. supinatus measured nearly 4 feet long. If you've ever seen a giant Chinese salamander, the two are pretty similar, only our ancient friend had tusks. It had a mouthful of gnarly teeth and a pair of tusks that looked like big fangs curving from the roof of its mouth, hence the connection to a warthog. Attack of the dino fleas. In prehistoric times, furry creatures and feathered animals suffered from the terror of fleas. Not much has changed in that regard. A dinosaur getting fleas was just like your dog getting fleas, only there was one major difference. Fleas that attacked dinosaurs were about 10 times larger than modern fleas. Gross. Researchers recently discovered the fossilized remains of 2 dinos from around 165 million years ago who had fleas. You would have needed a lot more than flea shampoo to get rid of these bugs. You would have needed a supersized electric fly swatter, and that might not have been enough. You might have needed a wooden club to beat these things off your pet dinosaur if you'd been alive back then. Each giant flea had long mouth parts that they used to penetrate the thick lizard-like skin of a dinosaur. Its mouth parts were also serrated, allowing it to stick its yucky bits into a dinosaur and slurp out its blood. Here's a picture, courtesy of Capital Normal University in Beijing. Look at the size of that freakish nightmare fuel. If you want to get even more grossed out, here's a sketch of it, also from the university. This particular specimen was about 1 inch long. I know what you're thinking, 1 inch long isn't that big. But think about it, you can barely see ordinary fleas, unless you happen to have unnatural eagle eyes. The fleas that feasted on dinosaurs were about the size of your thumbnail. You could have fried them up like giant ants and had flea popcorn. The biggest fish in the sea. If you're still here after the nastiness of the dino fleas, I'm impressed. Let's leave the gross stuff behind for now and take a look at a fish. Yes, a boring fish whose primary diet was plankton. A lot of plankton. This fish was 70 feet long and weighed a whopping 50 tons. It's called Leadsichthys, and 189 million years ago it lived in every single ocean on the planet. It was so widespread that none of its fossilized specimens have been consistent. Scientists keep finding fossils of Leadsichthys, but they are always different sizes. This is likely because scientists are finding fossilized remains of fish who died at different ages. Nobody knows exactly how big the fish could have gotten. Putting aside its preposterous size, the Jurassic fish was still a fascinating creature. It had 40,000 teeth in its mouth, a number so huge, I almost don't even believe it. It had so many teeth that when it bit into its prey, it was like getting bitten by a blender. Considering its size, it could have easily preyed on just about anything in the ocean. But it didn't. In fact, it never bit anyone or anything, despite having thousands of teeth. Leadsichthys used its teeth to filter feed plankton. It opened its mouth wide, gulped hundreds of gallons of water per second, and plankton gushed into its belly. It fed in the same way a modern blue whale feeds, and was doing really well until the end of the Cretaceous. Suddenly, the krill population plummeted. The oceans went from abounding with life to being too empty for the giant fish to live. Pentaceratops versus Triceratops. Triceratops gets all the attention, when its relative Pentaceratops should get some much-deserved love as well. But which of these hulking Cretaceous armored lizards was the biggest and baddest of them all? First of all, its name is a little misleading. Penta makes it sound like the dinosaur had 5 horns, whereas in reality it only had 3. There were 2 sticking out over its eyes like spiky eyebrows. Then it had 1 curving upward on its snout. It had the same number of horns as Triceratops. Technically speaking, the 2 long horns on its head were cheekbone growths. There's a fact you can take with you and save for later. It would be like if your cheekbones kept growing and stuck out of your face, like Wolverine's bone claws, but in the wrong part. There are way more of these dinosaurs than most people realize. They all belong to a family called ceratopsian, or horn-faced dinosaurs. The family includes Pentaceratops, Triceratops, Utaceratops, Titanoceratops, and Wendyceratops. The list goes on and on. Wendyceratops is interesting because its frill curves inward like a closing shell. But which one was the biggest? Pentaceratops had one of the largest heads of any dinosaur, period. Even among dinosaurs like Maximo the titanosaur, Pentaceratops' head was ridiculous. It was up to 10 feet long, maybe even bigger. Scientists think its head was big due to mating selection. These dinosaurs didn't dance around like birds. They didn't make nests like some creatures of the sea. To attract the ladies, male ceratopsians grew their heads as big as they could. The bigger the head, the more likely to attract a female. In the world of horned dinosaurs, bigger was always better. Triceratops also had a huge noggin, one that took up 1/3 of its body. Its body measured 30 feet long in total. The biggest Triceratops head ever found was 8.2 feet long. The horrifying bird monster. The Kalenkin is an extinct genus of terror bird that kind of looked like if a dodo mutated into something big, ugly, and vicious. Just like the Pentaceratops, its head was enormous. In fact, Kalenkin had the longest head of any known bird that ever lived. It also had long legs, allowing it to run at incredible speeds. Scientists believe Kalenkin hunted by running after its prey, then bashing them into submission with its humongous beak. It was so fast and vicious it could have hunted deer and horses. It most likely hunted giant sloths and armadillos too. Its head wasn't just long, it was heavy and sharp. It was like an anvil with a hooked spike on one end. The fact that a bird was able to eat a giant sloth, just like the one I told you about earlier that stood 20 feet tall, is shocking. Kalenkin even came up with some expert tactics for taking down large prey. Scientists think the bird focused on breaking the spine of its victims. With the weight of its head, it could crush its victim's spinal cord and then eat them at its leisure. Someone should rename this thing the Spine Snapper. In case you were wondering, the answer is yes. The bird did stand taller than the average human. It was more than 8 feet tall and lived 15 million years ago in Argentina. What's up with Argentina and all its ancient monsters? Patagonia really is the land of giants. The other biggest fish in the sea. Let's take a look at another fish. This one not quite as big as Leadsichthys, but still impressive and a little scary. It's called Mawsonia, living in Africa and Brazil 99 million years ago. It was big enough to swallow a person whole. Mawsonia wasn't picky when it came to its meals. The reason I'm excited to tell you about this humongous beast of the sea is that it's a type of coelacanth. Today, there are only 2 species of coelacanth known to scientists. But up until 1938, scientists thought they had gone extinct, along with everybody else. The coelacanth is one of the most ancient beings still alive on our planet. In 1938, a South American museum curator was on a fishing trawler when he found the first living specimen. He discovered what was supposed to be dead since the asteroid impact. In the years since, scientists have spotted coelacanths now and again, but they remain elusive, living deep in the ocean, 2,300 feet beneath the surface. By modern standards, they grow fairly large. The biggest fish can reach roughly 7 feet, weigh about 200 pounds, living for upwards of 60 years. But in ancient times, they grew even bigger. These living fossils were more like living monstrosities 99 million years ago. Mawsonia grew almost 20 feet long. As a side note, it's believed these massive fish played an early role in the evolution of fish to amphibians. Their unique characteristics make them seem like missing links between marine fish and terrestrial four-legged slimy creatures that first flopped out of the water. Which gigantic creature did you like hearing about today? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to tell me what you want to hear about next time. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe before you go.
Be sure to stay tuned for extra content you might have missed. Predator X. In 2009, the media went wild over the discovery of a ferocious prehistoric beast with 4 times the bite power of a Tyrannosaurus rex. Dubbed Predator X, the large-headed aquatic hunter is from an extinct group of marine reptiles known as pliosaurs. Fossils of 2 specimens that were discovered in Svalbard, Norway, indicated that Predator X may have measured up to 40 feet long. It had a 6.5-foot-long skull, which explains why scientists believe that it had such an immensely strong bite. This head was larger than most people. I mean, how tall are you? But it wasn't until 2012 that scientists formally named and described the creature, called Pliosaurus funke. Predator X lived throughout the world's oceans around 150 million years ago during the Jurassic era. Truthfully, it's difficult to say exactly how big the species was, because experts only have partial skeletons to work from when it comes to calculating its size. With such limited evidence to base their calculations on, researchers are also unable to estimate the animal's bite force with any certainty. One thing that is clear is P. funke's ferociousness. In the words of study co-author Patrick Drunkenmiller, they were the top predators of the sea. They had teeth that would make a T-Rex whimper. Predator X shared the ocean with other ancient giants, including other pliosaurs, which were characterized by their short necks, pear-shaped bodies, massive heads, and 4 flippers. Thalattoarchon. Thalattoarchon was a type of marine reptile known as an ichthyosaur. It lived around 245 million years ago, during the Middle Triassic period. The type species of this creature's genus was discovered in Nevada in 1997, but Thalattoarchon itself wasn't described until 2013. We've been learning a lot about prehistoric creatures recently. They existed at the beginning of a lengthy era dominated by large aquatic predators. Most ichthyosaurs had simple conical teeth, but Thalattoarchon had double-edged, blade-like teeth. Its largest tooth measured around 4 inches long. This species also had large eyes set into a large head, which was roughly twice as big in ratio to its body size as the heads of other ichthyosaurs. Thalattoarchon's formidable size and terrifying teeth ranked it as an apex predator among other ichthyosaurs at a time when land-dwelling reptiles were migrating to the sea in large numbers. Unlike some of these creatures, it was especially well suited to marine life after having emerged into existence just 5 million years after the world's worst-known mass extinction, known as the End Permian event. Scientists point toward its adaptability as a sign that aquatic life rebounded impressively quickly after the event compared to their land-living cousins. The Tully monster. 300 million years ago, parts of North America were covered by a shallow inland sea. At the time, the Mason Creek area of what is now Illinois was home to numerous soft-bodied animals. One of the most bizarre prehistoric discoveries scientists have made there is the Tully monster. At first glance, it resembles a slug, but where you would expect its mouth to be, it had a long, thin appendage with what looked like grasping claws. Its eyes were located at the end of stalks protruding from its body. The creature is downright strange, and for decades since its discovery, scientists have been trying to determine exactly what it was. They can't seem to agree on whether it was a vertebrate, meaning it had a backbone, or an invertebrate, meaning it had no spine. Researchers claim to finally solve the mystery in 2016. They argued that the Tully monster was a vertebrate because its eyes have more in common with animals that have backbones. The team concluded that the creature was a jawless fish distantly related to modern-day lampreys. On the other hand, another group of experts identified several invertebrates that also have the eye features that the other scientists used for classifying the creature, calling into question the accuracy of their findings. It seems as though the more people look into it, the more confusing it gets, leaving them with more questions than answers. Liopleurodon. The extinct Liopleurodon marine reptile genus encompassed 2 species, both of which may very well qualify as some of the mightiest aquatic creatures of all time. These apex predators lived between 165 and 155 million years ago during the late Jurassic period in what is now France. At the time, sea levels were much higher than they are today, and the area was covered in a shallow body of water. The larger of the 2 species, Liopleurodon ferox, typically grew between 16 and 23 feet long, with the biggest known specimen likely measuring over 33 feet long. On average, the species' weight ranged between 2,200 and 3,700 pounds. It's difficult to definitively measure the creature's size, however, because scientists have only found limited fossilized remains. With 4 large flipper-like limbs, these ambush predators were strong swimmers. They were capable of accelerating quickly, which was a major advantage when it came to pursuing prey. But these prehistoric sea monsters were not infallible. Liopleurodons and other pliosaurs ultimately lost their battle for survival against a newer, more adept and deadlier group of reptiles known as mosasaurs. Coelacanth. Nicknamed living fossils, coelacanths are primitive-looking deep-sea fish that, until relatively recently, scientists thought were extinct. Everyone assumed they disappeared along with the dinosaurs around 65 million years ago, but they learned otherwise in 1938 when a live specimen was found off the African coast. There are 2 known coelacanth species. Experts think that these ancient deep dwellers, which have been around for an estimated 400 million years, represent an early evolutionary stage of fish transitioning into land animals, according to National Geographic. Found at up to 2,300 feet below the waves, coelacanths are both slow-growing and slow-moving. They reach more than 6.5 feet long and weigh as much as 200 pounds. Scientists originally believed that coelacanths live somewhere between 20 and 60 years, but a recent study by French researchers found that they have a lifespan of up to 100 years. Females become mature during their late 50s, and pregnancies are thought to last for around 5 years. Males reach sexual maturity between 40 and 69 years old. The coelacanth's lengthy reproductive cycle unfortunately does not bode well for its future. These fish are extremely endangered. In fact, they're lucky they've held on for this long. After all, there's a reason experts believe that they were long extinct, and it's because they are so seldom seen. Their slow gestation cycle does little to revive the rapidly disappearing population. Sadly, this living fossil may not live for very much longer unless urgent conservation measures are taken. Why do you think these prehistoric fish live so long and take such a long time to reproduce? Let me know in the comments below. Big shout out to Janelle, Allison, and Cora Blue. Thanks so much for watching and supporting this channel. Love you guys, and if you are new here, welcome, and be sure to subscribe to join the Origins Explained family. Kronosaurus. The Kronosaurus genus encompassed some of the prehistoric world's largest pliosaurs, with most measuring 30 to 36 feet long and weighing between 7 and 10 tons. Members of this genus inhabited early Cretaceous waters between 120 and 100 million years ago. There were 2 known Kronosaurus species. One was found in what are now New South Wales and Queensland, Australia. The other was discovered in modern-day Colombia. Scientists think that Kronosaurus may have had a worldwide presence, and that its fossils simply haven't been discovered on other continents yet. Kronosaurus was one of the deadliest marine reptiles that ever existed. It was closely related to the Liopleurodon. The 2 bore striking similarities despite living some 40 million years apart. Like its earlier relative, Kronosaurus had deceptively sharp-looking teeth. In reality, the animal's ferocity came from its powerful bite, which enabled it to shake and crush its prey to death in its mouth. Its fast-swimming speed was also an advantage. Kronosaurus fed on fellow marine reptiles, as evidenced by its bite marks, which were found in the fossils of other aquatic creatures of the time. Pliosaurs were eventually weakened by the evolution of creatures that were better suited to survive in a marine habitat, including sharks and a family of reptiles known as mosasaurs. By the time the dinosaurs were wiped out in the mass extinction event, pliosaurs were already virtually gone from the planet. David Attenborough horseshoe crab. There are only 4 known modern horseshoe crab species, but if you rewind a few 100 million years, you'd find a vast array of horseshoe crabs that came in all different shapes and sizes. A study from last year describes one such species. Dubbed Attenborough superspinosus, it's named after the popular nature documentary host and conservationist Sir David Attenborough. It was one of many distinctly bizarre horseshoe crabs that lived between 250 and 200 million years ago, known as australimulids. A. superspinosus lived in marginal environments along the border between land and sea, as well as in freshwater habitats, unlike today's horseshoe crabs, which live almost exclusively in marine settings. Discovered in 2018 and 2019 during research trips to Russia's Ural Mountains, this bottom-dwelling species probably ate whatever it could. Scientists are unsure why australimulids went extinct, but they suspect that it had something to do with their proximity to freshwater environments, where they were less equipped to survive than the creatures they shared their habitats with. 2 of the remaining horseshoe crab species are considered endangered. Like their ancestors, they too could soon be wiped off the planet. Unlike their ancestors, they are likely to go extinct due largely to the effects of human activity. The recently described fossil represents just one of a dozen species that are named after Sir David Attenborough, including a marsupial lion, a dragonfly, and a flower, just to name a few. Mosasaurus. Mosasaurus is the type genus of an extinct group of aquatic reptiles called mosasaurs. They lived alongside the dinosaurs between 82 million and 66 million years ago, ruling the waters of what are now Europe and North America during the late Cretaceous. Their fossils often appear inland, where shallow seas existed during warm periods marked by higher sea levels than we see today. For example, a body of water known as the Interior Great Sea once covered a large portion of the modern-day American Midwest. These unforgiving marine monsters drove at least one reptile group, the ichthyosaurs, to extinction. Mosasaurs outcompeted these aquatic predators for food and may have also had a role in eradicating other creatures. The largest mosasaur was the 60-foot-long, 15-ton Mosasaurus. It had a ferocious set of teeth that were ideal for shredding prey like fish, birds, and other marine reptiles. A second inner set of teeth acted as a safeguard to stop prey from escaping in the moments before they were devoured. Resembling a crocodile with fins, Mosasaurus was a top predator of its day. But like all the prehistoric monsters that came before them, mosasaurs were not immune to competition from more evolved creatures. If they hadn't been wiped out during the extinction event that killed all the dinosaurs, they may have even been eradicated by vicious ancient sharks, who were faster and smarter. Basilosaurus. The Tethys Sea was a tropical body of saltwater that existed from around 252 million years ago until roughly 66 million years ago. It was situated between the ancient supercontinents Gondwana and Laurasia. The early whale genus Basilosaurus lived here and throughout other water bodies of the prehistoric world. These primitive marine mammals were top predators of their environments. There are 2 known Basilosaurus species. Fossils of one were discovered along the Gulf Coast and in the eastern United States. Evidence of the other species was found in North Africa, including Jordan, Egypt, Morocco, and Tunisia, and possibly in Antarctica. Measuring up to 60 feet long, Basilosaurus may have been the biggest creature of its time period. It had a 3-foot-long skull with a bite force comparable to a T-Rex. A study of the ancient whale's stomach contents revealed that it was, indeed, a formidable force in its habitat, feasting on fish and sharks measuring up to 20 feet long. Bite marks on the skull fossils of smaller whales bear evidence that Basilosaurus also preyed on other cetaceans. Basilosaurus likely went extinct around 34 million years ago during the Eocene-Oligocene extinction event. It was small compared to some of history's other extinction events, but it wiped out many marine creatures, including the group of reptiles that includes the Basilosaurus. Terrifying Triassic predator. Scientists believe that the largest creatures to ever exist were marine species. A recent study found that one of the biggest among these animals was an ocean-dwelling monster of the Triassic period. Formerly named Symbospondylus youngorum, it lived around 244 million years ago. It looked similar to a modern whale, but with a 6.5-foot skull, it rivaled many of today's biggest cetaceans. The creature came into existence just 8 million years after the first ichthyosaurs, but based on its size, researchers think that its evolution was somehow expedited. In other words, it evolved incredibly fast for some reason. A recent study examined a fossil discovered in Nevada, where a shallow inland sea once existed. C. youngorum was the largest known tetrapod, or four-legged creature of the Triassic. It was also the first in a long line of sea-ruling giants that succeeded it. The species grew quickly thanks to its diet of ammonoids, which were small yet abundant. These findings are a small step toward completing the very confusing picture of marine mammal evolution. It's thought that C. youngorum came long before the first whales, but that it was possibly an early ancestor. The creature's fossil may open a new door into our understanding of the connections between ichthyosaurs and whales. This is just one of several ancient creatures that have been discovered and described in recent years that are giving a more complete picture of the prehistoric world. Thanks for watching! What's your favorite prehistoric creature? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already for more videos like these. See you soon! Bye!